whole chapter on narrative inquiry. John Creswell, Research Methods book. John Creswell is a very well-known research methods author. So he has talked about 5 qualitative approaches, and one of the qualitative approaches is narrative research. Routledge Handbook of Research in Applied Linguistics, we have a chapter on narrative inquiry written by Gary Barkhusen, which I'll talk about near the end of the sharing. Yeah. Okay, so based on this, you can see that there's legitimacy. The research world, by and large, has accepted narrative inquiry as a legitimate form of research method to find out what is happening out there. Now, what exactly is narrative inquiry? Have a look at some of the quotes about what exactly is narrative. Narrative is a way of pulling together different experiences that our participants have, and then pulling them together and constructing a story to share with the world, with the readers, what exactly is happening. Jerome Bruner, in 1984, quite a few decades ago, shared and challenged the Psychological Association to think about, to adopt 2 ways of thinking. One is what called a paradigmatic way, which is the default way of thinking, and a narrative way of thinking. So Polkinghorne went on to elaborate what exactly that would mean. A narrative way of thinking or analyzing the data is pulling together information from the research process and then organizing them into a story, presenting them as a story in the report, in the research report, such that it makes it easier for the audience to understand. Because who doesn't understand a story? When we share a story, it's easily understood. When we are children, we love listening to stories. When we are children, we love watching cartoons, for example, because cartoons are essentially stories. Many, multiple stories. So stories make events easier to understand. So that it's the value of a narrative analysis. The paradigmatic way of thinking, the paradigmatic mode of knowledge, as well as the paradigmatic analysis, is something we are very familiar with. We're collecting all the data and then analyzing them, for example, in terms of themes, in terms of content. So thematic analysis is an example of a paradigmatic analysis. This is more a traditional way of analyzing qualitative data. So why a narrative approach then? The approach is to help us understand possibly the thinking behind the actions, the thinking behind what has occurred in a particular situation. So whenever we do research, we conduct a research study, we study participants, human subjects. We don't want to just see numbers, we want to know exactly what they're thinking, why they have done certain things, why they have made certain decisions. Instead of pulling up just quotes, decontextualized quotes, we're trying to pull them together and to form a story so that we can understand this easily and have a better, deeper insight into their thinking itself. So for example, I borrowed this from a colleague of mine, a paper that he wrote. Have a look at this. Now, do you understand this? Do you understand the numbers itself? Now, since this is what Gloria shared, this is your first course in qualitative in the program, master's program, you'll be in a good position. Do you understand the numbers here? How about the numbers here? Now, without reading the article, without the author interpreting it and explaining it, it is difficult for us to understand. This is a story. This is a quantitative story. But this quantitative story needs more substantial explanation of what it means. Narrative inquiry is a story, but it's using the story format, the traditional story format, the narrative, to share about the findings. We want to highlight what we call the voices of our participants, the stories that they tell about their lives, about their experiences. Have a look at these two quotes from Mishler and Polkinghorne. It is very natural for humans to share their stories when we have a conversation with friends. What do we usually tell each other? We tell each other stories about ourselves, stories about what happened previously. So, in interviews, as long as we provide time for our participants, they will start, over time, they will start sharing about their stories, what has happened in their lives. Because the basis of them telling stories is they lead story lives. We all live a story life. Our life at the end, for example, maybe on our deathbed, we look back into our life. It is a life made up of different stories at different stages of our lives. So that's a complete narrative in that sense. So narrative inquiry means we go in to collect these stories and share that with the research world. So we are studying stories, that's it. And to approach or to get into narrative inquiry, we cannot run away from these two authors because they, in a way, they share this approach with the world, Planning and Economy, with this particular book of theirs. As you can tell from the quote, they highlight the fact that it is a collaboration between the researcher, us, and the participants. It is not just about the participants, but about us as well, because we're joining them in that storytelling. It is about meaning making. We want to make meaning of their experiences. We want to help them to share what it means to them, all these experiences that they have encountered. So that's why it's a meaning making process, narrative inquiry. Have a look at the paper that I have shared. Well, I pull out the stories, the narrative I shared with you in the beginning, the second narrative. And this part here, the highlighted portion. This is an analysis of what the story is about earlier. So I have the story, the narrative, and then the analysis. The story, and then the analysis. The story, the analysis. I use an approach called a layered account, where I interweave it with my interpretation, the narrative with my interpretation of the narrative itself. Of course, not all narrative inquiries do it, but this is one particular approach. And then after the narrative ends, I have a discussion. This is a more traditional way of discussing the findings that we have found itself. Okay. So that is what narrative inquiry is. It's actually about looking for stories, pulling out the stories from the participants itself. So what are the main aspects of this particular approach? First thing is, we must remember there is this three-dimensional space. What is this three-dimensional space? Because all stories, there will be a space of temporality, time, sociality, the interrelationships between people. and place. Where exactly did it take place? So for example, when we meet a close friend, and we ask this question, oh, you look really down, what happened? And then the friend will start telling us about what happened. So the friend is telling us his or her story. And usually in that story, they'll tell us about when it happened, where it took place, and it took place with who. So that is what we call the three-dimensional space. And so this is something we need to have in the collection of the data in writing of the story. The next is emplotment. We need to emplot. We need to plot the story. We need to plot the data, to pull them together to form that story. Because in all stories there is a plot. We have the beginning, the setting, the complications, development of story, complication, the resolution. That's called plotting, a normal narrative plot. So the last point, the blue point, is usually constructed on a particular point, particular meaning that the author wishes to tell the audience. I'm going to share with us an example in the next slide. It's not because it's taken on a particular stance, but it's just a very glaring example, and it's an example that we should be quite familiar with because it's happening right now as we are speaking here. All right? Let's have a look at the example. And this is first two newspaper headlines. This one is a journal article. So these are all commenting on the mass media, particularly the mass media from a particular country. They have a plot. They focus on a story that they wish to tell the world. So they have chosen certain data to accentuate so that the reader will tend to believe, okay, this is the story itself. So the analysis done show that this is very clear. There is a purpose to how they plotted the story itself. So as narrative inquirer, we are also plotting the story. We're trying to help our participants make meaning of that story. But of course, that plot is not something we construct completely. It's a co-construction process with the participant. What exactly does it mean for them? We help to interpret it, and then as we interpret it, we share that interpretation with the participants themselves, and to see if they would agree with that interpretation, because we are interpreting it from a third-party perspective. In a sense, we are able to see it clearly. We are in the midst of the experience, so possibly we can't see it so clearly. So we are helping to enlighten that situation for them, and to see if they have an epiphany, that is what is happening here. So that is the purpose of that plotting. So Clavinin Road, usually we end with that plot line. So what exactly is the plot line? The narrative inquiry helps the participants find that plot line itself, to make meaning of all the experiences they have gone through. And the third tenet is relational. Narrative inquiry is relational. It is a relational endeavor. It's quite unlike the other qualitative approach where we ask questions, ask interview questions, or administer a survey, and then we leave. The narrative inquiry process is not so clear-cut, not so quick. Look at this quote from Clavinin. We intentionally come into a relation with the participants. They share their stories with us. We share our stories with them. We build a relationship. A narrative inquiry requires in-depth understanding of each other. So it's only when we share about ourselves that our participants are more willing to share more about themselves. Because we're trying to find out deeper insights into their lives, into their experience, into their feelings and thoughts about their experience. Just by the normal interview setting, asking questions, we may not really get the details that we need. So a narrative inquiry requires us to build a relationship with them. So if you recall the paper that I shared and the second story itself, I followed my participants, a group of 4 participants, 4 beginning teachers, for 2.5 years. That's 2.5 years. And they become my friends after that. And I meet up with a few of them regularly, either for meals or drinks. So that's how we build a relationship with them. Because we become very close, a narrative inquiry, through narrative inquiry. It is central, that relationship is central to understanding our participants. So now I'm going to share how do we construct the narratives itself. Okay, the first step, of course, is to collect the data. Look at the examples here. I've got audio recordings, interview transcripts, email correspondence, phone text messages, and journal writing notes after each interview. After each interview, I'll write down notes about them. So this is the data. So I need to check, I need to transcribe, I need to send a transcription to them. This is a normal process of all forensic research. We send a transcript to them for member checking.